Thanks for clicking on Wayne.com for this week's edition of Inside the Zone. Justin Kenny of Optimum Performance Sports with us. It is SAC rivalry week here in week 7, but before we get to those games, because there are a lot of great matchups across the board, let's talk about what we learned from last week. Adams Central, South Adams was our highlight zone game of the week. We thought Adams Central came in favored. Some said heavily favored. And it turned into one of the most lopsided game of the weeks that we've ever had. Much to the credit, taking nothing away from South Adams, much to the credit of what we've seen from Adams Central. What's your takeaway from that one, knowing that, man, I mean, it was 42-0 at halftime, Adams Central in the lead.
It just shows the distance between Adams Central and the rest of the ACAC this year, and quite frankly, the majority of the rest of 1A. I'm putting Indianapolis Lutheran and Adams Central as those two teams that cut above everybody else in 1A. You know, if everything goes like chalk, as they say, I think those two teams are playing for a 1A championship.
And if you're Adams Central, man, you've played Park Heritage, you've played South Adams. I mean, you've pretty much taken care of anybody that's been thrown out on the schedule. Sands East Side on the road, a ranked 2A team where, you know, a two-point conversion goes the other way in the fourth quarter, and maybe we're talking about overtime, we're talking about maybe a win, who knows. But if you're Adams Central, what can you do from this point on to get ready to play, you know, make a long postseason run and get your team ready to win, hopefully, a state championship if you're Michael Mosier?
Well, you can't get complacent. You have, 3 more weeks to really continue to get better and better and better. And then, as every coach wants to be doing, you peak at week 10, and you're playing your best football when you enter the postseason. That's the goal for Coach Mosier. He's going to be heavily favored the rest of these 3 games, probably throughout at least the sectional round. So for him, it's all about, keeping these guys focused, and it's cliche and all that, but he just has to make sure these boys aren't slacking off or looking ahead too much.
And I want to also go back to last week in the NE8. There were some interesting
fun,
outcomes.
wasn't it?
It was fun, unless you're an East Noble Knight, because you went in, you think, okay, after losing to Leo, they're still the second best team in that conference, but they go to Norwell, and Norwell shuts them out, runs the football very effectively. Luke Graff looked like he did a little bit of everything except sell popcorn on Friday night. Not only that, Columbia City, you think that might be the 3rd best team, perhaps, or 4th best team, top half in the conference. They go to New Haven, and Jakar Williams playing some magic tricks out there in the backfield. They lose 21-0, turnovers costly. What's your takeaway in the NE8 now that after Leo, things have gotten a lot more muddled than we thought?
Well, look at Norwell. Back-to-back years being able to knock off East Noble now, coming back from a double-digit deficit last year on the road, and then just shutting down East Noble this past Friday. You felt like the Knights would come back after that Leo game and say, okay, we're re-energized, we're going to prove something. And instead, they do not score a single point. And all of a sudden, we're looking at an East Noble team going, we were getting excited for round 2 between those two, but mentally, where is East Noble at? Because we know physically they can match up with anybody in that league, but to come out and lay an absolute egg offensively against Norwell, not taking anything away from the Ossian Knights, but we expected better from East Noble, and I know Coach Amstutz did too. And then conversely with Columbia City, we felt, okay, maybe not New Haven, but these next 3 weeks where they have Leo, East Noble, Norwell, that's when we're going to find out just how good Columbia City is, and that's kind of been the case the last couple years. But New Haven was able to get those couple early scores, gain some confidence, and then an offense that we'd seen been able to put up a lot of points in the early half of the season really couldn't do anything against New Haven. When they were put down multiple scores, they really couldn't convert vertically to really stretch that New Haven defense. So, yeah, it was very fun. Throw in DeKalb Huntington North, which was an exciting game. Yeah. Despite, 2 teams that aren't in a conference race. It was a great week for Northeast State football. Pretty much exactly the opposite of what we had in the SAC.
Yeah, the SACs last week, I mean, it was blowout city. I think I saw where it might have been you that said the average margin of victory last week was like 45, 46 points.
Yeah, it was not pretty.
It was not. But this week hopefully makes up for that because we've got some really great matchups. It's rivalry week in the SAC. Yeah. It starts with the Battle of the Bishops. Bishop Luers, Bishop Dwenger. That's probably the biggest key game as far as the SAC race goes. How do you see this one sizing up, knowing that Luers right now sits alone atop the conference standings, 6-0 in conference play, and really rolling and looking very good. You haven't seen them be complacent in a game. Right. You've seen them take care of business when they've had to.
I am really curious to see what kind of Bishop Dwenger team we see on Friday, because it is a rivalry game, and you can say, throughout the records, all that, and that's true. But we've also seen some changes with Bishop Dwenger over the last couple weeks offensively, changing some things up and what they do and how they do it. We saw Bodie Dickerson go for over 300 yards last Friday, through I think it was 3 touchdowns through the air, a couple on the ground. It was against Concordia, but then again, do we have some stability there at the quarterback spot for Bishop Dwenger, and are they be able to make some plays in this, kind of changed up offense from what we saw through the first half of the year? Are they able to get the ball to Rocco Sioka a little bit more? Are they able to get KJ Tipman in space? So those are the questions, going into Friday. We kind of know what we're getting from Bishop Luers, but Bishop Dwenger, have they found something the last couple weeks? I don't think we can take too much out of that win over Concordia, but they do look a heck of a lot better than they did the previous 2 weeks.
Yeah, offense was clicking, and you mentioned they've kind of maybe found some good ideas of what to do at the quarterback position. And Rocco Sioka, to me, I felt like he should get the ball more. Like, that guy's a player. If you don't know, that guy's a player. For Bishop Luers, how do you enter this game? Obviously, you're going to get Dwenger's best. It is. I know there's that cliche of you throw out the records, as you said, like that. But if you're Bishop Luers, you're taking a look at this game and your Week 9 game against Snyder. 2 of the last 3 are going to be big competition, big schools, where you have. I know Dwenger's line isn't as big as it has been in years past, but those are the concerns when you're facing Dwenger and Snyder. To me, if you're Bishop Luers as a 2A school, you're worried about offense and defensive line play, knowing that size isn't necessarily on your side if you're Luers in these next 2 or 3 weeks.
Right, absolutely. And I think the way that offense has been executing, it's still humming along and just making play after play. And last Friday was the latest example of that. I feel as long as Bishop Luers continues to come in with the same intensity and the same drive that they have through the first 6 weeks, they should be able to beat their rival in Bishop Dwenger. Me personally, I think the biggest game left on the schedule in the SAC is that Week 9 game between Snyder and Bishop Luers. Winner effectively will win the SAC if both teams win out leading into that football game. So for Bishop Luers, you cannot overlook your rival and take them for granted because they have a couple losses this season and really haven't looked up to snuff in terms of how Luers has played, because Dwenger, especially in their home field, really could surprise if Luers takes them lightly.
And I know Carroll is sitting there thinking, okay, man, this is a week where we could get a little bit of help. We could get a little bit of help from Dwenger. Maybe we get a little help from Snyder. They're 5-1, sitting right behind Luers right now. But, of course, that Week 1 loss with the way that the tiebreakers and everything works in the SAC, that looms large in the head-to-head. But Carroll, man, they just looked fantastic. I was there, against Southside. You knew they were going to have a big night. But they've got Homestead this week, and that's a game, again, a rivalry game, a throw out the records game, and a team that you could see this one maybe going either way when it comes down to it on Friday night. How do you see this one playing out, Homestead-Carroll, on Friday?
I feel like Carroll, is in position to maybe knock their rival off, something they haven't been able to do recently. Yeah. Homestead's been able to dominate this series over the last several years. So the way Carroll is playing, you have to could they be playing the second best football in the SAC right now outside of Bishop Luers? I think you can throw Snyder in that conversation too. But in this one, we've seen the Homestead offense at least 2 weeks ago scuffle against Snyder. Can Carroll, with that defense that I don't think has gotten enough praise on how much better they've played and looked this year as opposed to the last couple seasons, can they make things difficult for Peyton Slavin and Homestead? I think maybe they looked 2 weeks ago at Snyder and maybe see, a way to do it, a game plan. We'll see if they try to copy that and take advantage.
I was going to say the same thing about that Carroll defense. When we've seen Carroll be competitive as far as the SAC standings go, it feels like they always have the offense. And it comes down to the same thing with Homestead. Can they do some things defensively? And you see Dylan Bennett making a lot of plays this year. You see the Jackway kid on the line. Like, they have some guys on defense. It isn't all just outscoring everybody.
Right.
They have some playmakers on the defensive side of the football as well. Let's talk a little bit about you got Snyder at Northrop. I know the Panthers will go in heavily favored. Spooler Stadium bragging rights on the line. But if you're the Panthers, you've got big games looming after this week. So you're talking about Luers. And you've also got Bishop Dwenger, still left after this week. This is the final tune-up before those 2 games. What are you looking forward to if you're Kurt Tippmann? How do you get this team prepared? Not overlooking Northrop, but get them prepared to make an SAC title type of stretch run when it comes to the final 2 weeks of the regular season.
Keep doing what you're doing. I think defensively it's what it's going to come down to over those final 2 weeks of the season, particularly that matchup against Bishop Luers in week 9. So continue to refine things. They look so much better after that, de facto bye week after Southside had to bow out. So they've looked tremendous. Continue to grind, continue to get better, perfect some things against, Northrop, and then look forward to the final 2 weeks where, once again, Snyder, the only team in the SAC outside of Bishop Luers that controls its own destiny.
Yeah, and if you're Snyder, to me, one of the things, seeing them earlier in the year, you were hoping they would tune up the secondary because Carson Clark is going to test them, Brody Glenn is going to test them, Bodie Dickerson, as you mentioned earlier, Rocco Sioka. Those guys could give them a test vertically that Snyder hasn't seen in a while. They played Carroll early in the season, and obviously they corralled Homestead when you think about teams in the SAC that throw it. But, I mean, this is going to be a big stretch at the end of the season, not only for the SAC, but for the playoffs in terms of being able to stop teams that can throw the football and having their secondary step up to the level they can.
Well, it was a new scheme, at least in the secondary, that Snyder kind of brought to the table this year, and they were kind of thrown into the fire early in the season, facing some teams that like to challenge you vertically. So they were exposed a little bit, but after they were able to settle in and the guys really started reacting instead of thinking to plays, that's when you saw Snyder really step it up in the secondary. And conversely, being able to get pressure up front always helps your defensive backs, and Snyder's been able to do that as the season has gone on.
Totem Pole game, how do you see this one playing out? I know your Legends
they need a win, man.
Champing at the bit, and there's nobody that's had a worse schedule to start the season off than Northside. They're finally kind of getting into some games that are more winnable for them.
Yeah, you get Southside, Northrop, Concordia over the final 3 weeks of the season that are all winnable for Northside, and you have to feel, we talked so much about those first 3 games, and if Northside can get through those, they're feeling good. And they survived. They were 0-3, but they didn't fall apart as a team. They get a win against Wayne, and then they have to play Luers and Homestead back-to-back. So now it finally opens up a little bit, and you have to feel if Coach Johnson has been able to keep these kids together, and it seems like by and large he has been able to. These kids are still engaged and still playing hard and really want to get some wins. This is the time to do it, and you are sitting 1-5, but you could be 4-5 by the end of the regular season, and that looks a heck of a lot better.
It certainly does. Hey, let's move on to the NE8. You got New Haven at Belmont, Norwell at DeKalb, Leo at Huntington North, East Noble at Columbia City. East Noble at Columbia City, those are 2 teams that are both looking for bounce-back weeks. I know Columbia City is going to be back at home on their turf trying to get that offense rolling again.
Yeah.
East Noble's like, I didn't think we would lose 2 games in a row this season. They've got to be thinking kind of the same thing. That's the game of intrigue from the NE8 this week. How do you see that playing out at Columbia City's relatively new field on Friday?
Well, you'd think, going to this one, okay, it's a get-right game for East Noble, but that was what we felt like last week with Norwell. So it's a get-right game for both teams because I know neither were happy. Both get shut out a week ago. So which team comes out better prepared? Which team comes out focused? And I feel that's really what this one's going to come down to because – East Noble, Rowan Zolman was nursing an injury, but, by and large, that team was flat last week. Columbia City was flat as well. And it almost feels like, Columbia City just doesn't look as confident when it's facing teams that can match up with them physically or athletically. And it seems like, Columbia City is great at feasting on inferior teams, but then just does not have the push or the desire to compete at a high level and take it up to the next level that they need to do to be a threat in the NE8. And unfortunately, until they do it, until they beat a Leo or an East Noble or, a Norwell at this point, then you have to doubt it.
I feel like your inbox is going to be flooded by Brett Fox and company.
He's probably texting me as soon as this thing goes live.
And I'm glad I'm not you. Let's talk about the NECC because things have gotten a little bit interesting there. I mean, we know East Side is East Side at this point, but if you had picked Central Noble to be 6-0 at this point, kudos to you.
Yes.
Because it's only the 4th time in program history. And Churubusco at Central Noble looks like it's going to be a pretty darn interesting game as far as the NECC standings go. It might be for 2nd place, but it does look like 2 competitive football teams up in Albion on Friday night.
It does, and it's the first of 3 challenging games for Central Noble to close out the regular season when they get Churubusco and East Side and Garrett over the final 3 weeks of the season. So this is really kind of where we're going to see just where Central Noble is in the upper echelon of the NECC. And I think Cherubusco is a great challenge to them with what they do. And Nick Nondorf has been tremendous for Cherubusco, and Riley Burhoff, another year of seasoning for him at quarterback. But, Central Noble, if they have a healthy Will Hoover, and it's kind of been a if the last couple of years on kind of nursing him and making sure he's healthy for the stretch run, that changes the complexion of everything for Central Noble when Will Hoover's on the football field.
And I know we don't talk about them every week. We rarely talk about them, but we probably should talk a lot about Warsaw a little bit more.
Yes, man, the Tigers of the Bart Ball, baby.
Bart Ball is full effect. He is really, we talked about this with Carroll when Doug Dinan took over. It was a sleeping giant type of program where they're good at a lot of other sports. They just hadn't been good at football for a while. And he was able to kind of turn the table, get interest in football. Helps when you have a couple Trenkles as well.
Yeah, a little bit.
But Warsaw, very similar pattern with Bart Curtis, because he comes obviously with a great resume, and he comes with his own style of football. It works for what they do at Warsaw. They've got a gritty mentality. How has he been able to turn Warsaw into a power? They got Wawasee this week. They'll be heavily favored in that game, but they could be looking at an NLC championship again this season, and that is a far cry from where they were 5 years ago.
Well, you looked at it, and a school that big, when you're 6A, should have some amount of success in football, considering the conference that it's in. It's solid, but it's not the Metropolitan. So you feel like, okay, get the right guy in there, and it's the right system. So we never say, okay, Warsaw is oozing with athletes, but it has a lot of kids, right? And it can be physical. So when you bring somebody in like by Bart Curtis, and he runs the little, the wishbone option type thing, it really levels the playing field. It neutralizes the advantage that other teams may have. And we saw it last year when they beat Carroll in the playoffs. And everybody's like, what? And even around here now, I keep saying, watch out for Warsaw, watch out for Warsaw. Nah, whatever, they couldn't compete in the SAC. I guarantee you they could, compete in the SAC. I'm not saying they go out and win the bell, but they're getting 5, 6, 7 wins in the SAC, in my opinion. So it's another one of those teams that, man, you wish the SAC had a couple non-conference, weeks or games opportunities. Love to see Warsaw play a couple of the teams here. I'd love to see Leo play somebody. I'd love to see East Noble play. It's those options that we wish we had, in the regular season, not just the postseason. But I feel like Carroll looks good, yes. Homestead's solid. But picking Warsaw in that sectional is not as insane as some people want to think.
Yeah, I remember going out there in the playoffs last year when they had Carroll, and I think Carroll thought, okay, man, we're gonna. Not that they were overconfident,
right?
But that they had the advantage based on the competition that they played throughout the season, and Warsaw just did what Warsaw did, and grind the clock, long possessions.
Yeah,
it's difficult to see who's got the football coming out. And obviously the Tigers won.
And it's tough to prepare for in a week or 2 weeks if you draw them, with the bye.
It's like playing Navy or Army or somebody in college football, where they've always seemed to play those big games closer than you think Notre Dame or somebody like that.
Yeah.
They play it closer because you don't have all that time to prepare for.
Right, absolutely.
Anything else that you're looking forward to about this week? We are really getting down to the nitty-gritty. I mean, really after this week, you're talking about teams starting to think, if they're not in a conference championship hunt, starting to think, okay, man, we need to get this ready and ramped up for the postseason.
Yeah, I think, one thing that we're kind of taking, that we don't really focus on as much when we get to this part of the season is we're focusing so much in the league championship races. And we see games like DeKalb and Huntington North go down, and it was an epic game last Friday night. And we see, New Haven, Columbia City, which was, an eye-opening, kind of game for New Haven. And could they put something together? Is who are some of these other teams that aren't the Leos and the Lures and the Adams Centrals and the East Sides that are going to put a run together here late, and then maybe 4, 5, 6 weeks we're going, wow, that team came out of nowhere to win a sectional. So I think that's kind of what the focus is on. The last couple of weeks will be all about crowning champions, but let's see which other teams that are potentially out of league races can start getting some momentum and getting ready for the postseason.
Do you have one team that you like that maybe we're not talking about that might be, a middle of the conference type team, but when they get in whatever division they're playing in the postseason could make a run? Do you have anybody off the top of your head?
I mean, I think the way Norwell's playing, potentially you could throw them in there.
Yeah.
I think, with Norwell, you're looking at a 3A team that, could do some things. And then where's Snyder in 5A? Where is Bishop Dwenger in 5A? So Snyder's still in the league race, but also, is Snyder rounding into form to potentially make a run in 5A? Could Bishop Dwenger get back there? I think we can all agree that Cathedral's the heavy favorite in 5A, but who can maybe potentially make a run that we're not paying attention to?
All right. Well, we'll try to pay attention to it next week here on Inside the Zone. But for Week 7, He's Justin Kenny. I'm Glenn Marini, and we'll see you next Monday here on Wayne.com.